News and Talk 1380. You are listening to the WAOK Morning Show. My name is Angela Green, and I am joined by our very special guest this morning, Fred C. Trump III, who is the grandson of Fred Trump, the patriarch of the Trump family real estate empire, and he is also the nephew of Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States. Good morning, Fred. How are you?
Angela, great to be here with you.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. So, you are the author of All in the Family, The Trumps, and How We Got This Way. So,
Yes.
we are very interested in hearing all about the Trumps and how you got this way. So, first, I want to say that apparently you and I have a few things in common. So, I'm also an author and an advocate for children, however, an education advocate. So, in fact, I still do some advocacy work on the side. So, I know that your son, William, was your motivation for your advocacy work and
Mhm.
advocating for the intellectually and developmentally disabled community. So, how is your son, William, doing right now?
Well, thank you very much for asking. William medically is okay. He does have a little bit of a cold right now, but it's more allergies than anything. But medically, he's doing fine. He's still on very potent anti-seizure medication every day.
Mm-hmm.
But what we struggle with is finding a meaningful day program for him. What
Mm-hmm.
many people may not realize is that when a child ages out of school, say 21, 22 years old, it's very difficult to find programs that meet the needs of the different individuals. And that is one thing that I am trying to change in this country. And I was listening to your interview with Joy Reid about Project 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know from your advocacy on education, we cannot allow that to happen.
Exactly.
That program, it would be devastating to public education in this country. That would harm mostly minority communities and certainly disabled.
Yes, definitely. So it must be very expensive to find care for him and to care for him otherwise, in terms of the expenses that you have to take on for him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's expensive for anybody that has a child with disabilities, and it's really one of the three legs of what I'm trying to accomplish here is caregiver funding and caregiver training. You know, these people, and I want to zoom off to one thing in a minute, but caregivers are paid relatively small amounts of money per hour. In
Hmm.
fact, many of them are working two or three jobs, and that needs to change. They also need better training to help taking care of our kids, you know, our brothers, our sisters, our parents, eventually us. So that is very important to me. But I know we probably will talk about this later, but I'd like to just get into it now.
Hmm.
Many of William's aides are Haitian Americans.
Wow.
So what is happening in Springfield, Ohio, to me right now is just uh, is grotesque,
Yes.
and I want to say needs to stop. But I know Donald too well to know that he's going to play this out as long as he can. These people, I've known them for years. My wife Lisa and I entrust them with the care of our child. I don't know if you could pay a higher compliment than that. And the fact that this community is being demeaned and used as a political prop uh, out in Ohio now. I want to say it needs to stop, but again, Donald won't let it go, and neither will his sidekick JD Vance.
Yeah, I'm sure that must have been very disheartening to you when you saw that they were pitching this false story about the Haitian community and seeing the effect that it's having on them. So, just as bad as what he's saying about the Haitians is the effect that it's having on the city of Springfield.
It's
Yeah,
nuts.
it is. It really is. So, to what benefit could this be to Donald to keep perpetuating this?
He needs to keep the hatred going. He needs somebody to put out as the enemy. And right now, we come up with this false story, and he'll, as I keep saying, he'll keep it going. It amps up his base. Here's another group of people that his base can look down on as bad people. The Haitian community came in legally to Springfield and many other communities, actually through a program started by a Republican, George W. Bush. And they're hardworking people. They've the aides for William have been in our house. We know their families. These are decent, hardworking people. So I respect the small business owners that are coming to their defense, the public officials in Springfield, the governor coming to their defense. We need more of that.
Yes, we definitely do. So, speaking of Donald, I saw one of your interviews maybe back in July when your book first launched, and you were telling a story about some pretty heartless things that he had to say about your son and your son's care. Can you share that with us?
Well, there are two. Are you talking about what he said about William?
Yes, what he said about your
Okay.
son.
Well, if you don't mind, let me just quickly go back. When he was elected president, my wife Lisa and I knew that we would have an opportunity to begin our advocacy on a national level. And we did. And I thank my cousin Ivanka for setting up our first meeting with a group that we've been involved with for many years called Equally Alive. And our first meeting was with Ben Carson, the same Ben Carson who was at Rocky's Barber Shop back in July of this year. And we had several more meetings throughout the next couple of years. In May of 2020, I organized a meeting with Alex Zazar, who was the head of Health and Human Services. Brett Giroir, if you remember, was pretty much the face of the COVID response.
Hmm.
And, and we eventually had a meeting with Donald in the Oval Office. And we were advocating again on the three pillars that I followed, that caregiver, training and funding, housing, which is why we met with Ben Carson, and also to talk about efficiencies, how we can lower costs and yet give better services. The meeting ended, and Donald asked that I come back and talk to him for a minute personally. And he just said, those people, the costs, they should just die. And he was talking about the disabled community that we were there advocating on behalf of.
Wow.
3 years later, I was talking with Donald on the phone about William. And he said, he doesn't recognize you. Let him die and move down to Florida. Now, how one person could say that about any other human being, I just don't know. But to say it about your grandnephew, a person, William, that he has never met, ever, never asked to meet
Gosh,
William.
that's awful. I'm sorry, that's awful. Both what he said and also the fact that he's never met him. That is just, I can't even imagine that. I can't imagine. We'll continue the story. We got to pause for a break. We'll be right back on the other side. News and Talk 1380 WAOK. News and Talk 1380. We are back with our special guest, Fred Trump, this morning. So, Fred, your grandfather, Fred Trump Sr., was a real estate mogul. What were some of his influences on the family? And before you answer that, I want to say that I saw your sister's interview over the weekend, and she said a lot of Donald's cruel and abusive and bullying behavior, well, she kind of said he got it honest. So was your grandfather not a nice man?
My grandfather was not a very loving man. He was
Mm-hmm.
very sedate in terms of his emotions. That's a nice way of putting it.
Mm.
He was very driven, and yes, he was a titan in real estate in Brooklyn and Queens. There's no doubt about it. But he would pit his children against each other. There were five total children. My father being the second oldest, the oldest son. And that is a great example. My dad wanted no part of the family business. My father wanted to be an airline pilot, and he became an airline pilot. That was his dream. He followed his dream, which was something my grandfather had told young students for years. Follow your dream and do what you want to do, be the best at it. And my dad was on the path for that. My grandfather thought that was a low level job, if you will.
Mhm.
He wanted my father to be part of the business, and Dad didn't, and he suffered for it. And Donald piled on. And what's interesting is my father gave Donald the pathway to what he wanted, which was to work with my grandfather and eventually take over the business. But Donald couldn't let it go. He actually called my father a glorified bus driver. So the cruelty, yes, absolutely started with my grandfather by pitting his kids against each other. And Donald has used that for the rest of his personal life and his business life and his political life.
Yeah, definitely. We see it all the time. So, the title of your book, All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way. What was your inspiration for writing the book?
Well, it really was my dad, who was a very caring and charismatic guy. He was. People would say he'd walk into a room and it would just light up.
Hmm.
And also William, who is such a he's 25 years old now, is wheelchair bound, needs assistance with everything he does, but he is so brave and so inspirational, and he is the reason why I am out there advocating on behalf of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Okay. So, tell us, what is the ways of the Trump family and how did you get that way? What is the way? And is it something that kind of runs through everybody or most of you, or what's kind of going on there? Give us some insight.
Yeah, like every family, it's very complicated. Um, and you always talk about that crazy uncle who is at the Thanksgiving dinner table. As I've said, I just happen to have a atomic crazy uncle. And I guess that runs through the family. Again, not a very emotional family. There wasn't a lot of hugging and I love yous when we were together.
Hmm.
It really was a race to who could be the best. And that's okay. But it was when you failed that you were demeaned. And my father became a very bad alcoholic.
Hmm.
Alcohol destroyed my father's life. And he was looked on as the embarrassment of the family. Imagine going from the supposed golden child who lived his dream to becoming the embarrassment of the family. And I've certainly suffered from that. We, I've always felt I was looked down as a second class citizen in the family, which is fine. They can have Donald and his wife and his kids can have what they want. It's not what I want. I have a great wife and three fantastic kids, great friends. I really attribute that to my parents, who made sure that, especially with my dad, that always rooting for the underdog, doing what we can. And if you don't mind, if I could tell one quick story about
Yes,
Dad,
please go
since
ahead.
the anniversary of his death is coming up. When I was in college my freshman year, I was going to be taking a trip to Europe for 3 weeks as part of a program in school. And Dad was, we knew that his days, maybe not days were numbered, but he was very, very sick. And I had visited him in the local hospital a couple of days before I left on my trip. And he gave me a withdrawal slip from the bank to take out some money and said, go buy a camera. And I said, great, camera for me. I need a camera when I go over to Europe. I come back and he says, walk down the hall. There's a young woman about your age. She has terminal cancer and doesn't have long to live, but she really wants a camera. So here's my father, who is also on his way out. All he's thinking about was not my fun trip upcoming to overseas, but this young woman who had not much time left, but all she wanted was a camera.
Wow. Very thoughtful, unlike his brother. Uh,
Unlike his brother.
unlike his
So
brother.
people ask me, does he have an empathetic bone in his body? And the answer, Donald, no, he does not.
Wow. Were he and your father ever close? Like maybe when they were kids or teenagers, were they ever close or friends
It,
and brothers?
Donald actually did look up to my dad, and there's a little part in the book where Donald's at New York Military Academy, and he actually had a photo of my dad in his room. He did look up to my father. My
Mm-hmm.
father was a fun guy. He had great friends at St. Paul's School, where he went to high school. Certainly at Lehigh University, where I also went, and my older son Christopher went. Uh, Dad had tons of friends, and you could see now that Donald looked up to that. And one of the things, and I don't want to be an armchair psychiatrist because that's not a
Mm-hmm.
good thing for anybody. Donald really never had friends. He never had anyone that I could see he could call up and say, I'm having a problem here, or, you know, whatever the issue may be. He doesn't have that and really never had that in his life.
Well, I'm not really surprised to hear that at all. That doesn't surprise me in the least. So, speaking of him more, you said in one of your interviews that I saw that you and your sister received a letter from Donald's attorney advising you that the two of you, you and Mary, had been cut out of your grandparents' will. That was a pretty awful thing to have happened. Was there no recourse for you and Mary after that happened?
Oh, we went to court over it.
Okay.
We did because we thought it was wrong.
It was.
And people will remember back then. Now, this is the context that is really hurtful, if you will, is that William was born the day after we buried my grandfather. William was born on June 30th, 1999. A day or so after birth, William started having hundreds of seizures a day. He was at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan for 3 weeks in the neonatal intensive care unit. All of my aunts and uncles lived within walking distance of the hospital. They never visited. And frankly, neither did Mary, but they never visited. William went on to two other hospitals in the course of an additional 4 weeks, total of 7 weeks. When he came home a week or so later is when I received my copy of that letter saying that we had been taken out of my grandfather's will. Since my father was dead, instead of my grandfather's estate being split up 5 ways, it was now being split up 4 ways.
Wow.
What I'd like people, your listeners, to understand is back then, Donald was in one of the several times in his career, he was in dire financial straits. His Atlantic City properties were bankrupted. It was so embarrassing to him that the banks put him on an allowance. And we discovered, and I sort of suspected, that he had hatched a plan to have Mary and I taken out because he needed that money to stay afloat.
Wow.
So imagine. The other thing is, Donald, after my father had passed away in 1981,
Mm-hmm.
Donald was named my trustee. To me, that means you protect the person that you're the trustee for.
Right.
He was my trustee. He
Right.
did the exact opposite during the most vulnerable time of my life with my son in hospital, not protecting me. In fact, again, doing the exact opposite, taking advantage of me. So he took advantage of his father, who had dementia, his dead brother, and his nephew, whose son was in dire medical condition.
I wish I could say I was surprised to hear this, but I'm not. I'm so not surprised, and I don't think any of our listeners are either based on what we've been seeing. We'll talk some more after this break. We'll be right back. News and Talk 1380 WAOK. News and Talk 1380. We are back with our special guest, Fred Trump, the author of All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way. So, Fred, please don't be offended by this question, but I just have to ask you this because I've wondered this so many times. Have you ever felt embarrassed by your last name because of some of the things that Donald did? Just some of the horrible things, like maybe the insurrection. Have any of those things ever made you feel like, oh my gosh, have you ever
Yeah,
felt embarrassed?
Angela, it really is an interesting question because part of the great joy of writing this book was looking back on things. It's been cathartic in a way. And am I embarrassed by some of the things? You asked before what were my reasons for writing it, and I mentioned Dad and William, but January 6th really was, I don't know if embarrassing even covers it, but the role that Donald played in that episode was embarrassing. What he's doing now in Springfield, Ohio is embarrassing to me. And as I mentioned before, it's now personal for me. I hear he may want to go to Springfield, Ohio.
Oh,
I
God.
tell you what, I'll go there also. And I'd love to meet with the Haitian community and the business leaders and bring some good instead of the vileness that he brings. Yeah, I never wanted to admit that having the name was embarrassing, but yeah, it's becoming too much. And even now, my cousin Donnie, who years ago said to me, I don't want to work for my father anymore. I just want to live my own life. Donnie is full on right now, and the things that he's been saying, it's just embarrassing. It's just not the way I was brought up. I don't think anybody should act that way. So the answer to your question is yes.
Wow. Well, we have a caller on the line, James from Atlanta, who'd like to speak with you. James?
Yes, Angela, good morning.
Good
Yes,
morning.
so I have a question for you. I wonder if you can comment on this, what I've read over the years regarding Trump and his former mentor during the 70s and 80s, his former mentor, attorney, and fixer, Roy Cohn. I read that Roy Cohn, the one person who did more for Trump for, 13 or 14 years, other than his father. The one person who did more for him, and at the end, when it came to 86 and Roy Cohn was dying of AIDS, even President Reagan stepped in to help him to be admitted to certain hospitals. At that time, Trump cut off all communication with him, basically threw him under two buses. And he cut off all communication with him, would not visit him, and just ended it after all what Roy Cohn had done for him for a number of years. So are you familiar with that?
Oh, I certainly am. And when Angela asked about, how did Donald become the way he was, who was the inspiration? Certainly my grandfather, but I was going to mention Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was a very nasty guy. I knew him personally. A lot of what you see with Donald, the not giving up, never admitting you're wrong, that's all Roy Cohn. And Donald held that firmly in his past and in his present. But when Roy contracted AIDS, and I heard this directly from the staff at Mar-a-Lago, that when Roy finished eating, Donald didn't want his plates or his silverware to be put in a dishwasher. He just wanted them thrown out.
Wow.
And yes, the Reagans were very, very close with Roy Cohn, and so was Donald. But Donald, I couldn't hear exactly what you said, but I think it was he threw him under the bus, and he did.
Well, I say it threw him under one bus, pulled him out, threw him under another bus.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when we say that he cared about his supporters, I think about that, when I read it, that he really cared about
And
his supporters.
it's what I've been saying for the past month or so is Donald will use people as props, and then when he's done with them, that's the end of that. He doesn't want to hear from you again.
Wow. Wow. So we have another caller, Wes from Atlanta. Wes?
Yes, ma'am. How you doing? Good show. Hey, my man, Fred, look here, man. Hey, bro, this interview should be broadcast all over the world, man. But look here. I got two questions, man. Was your father, uncle, friends with Nikola Tesla, man? And they shared Tesla inventions? And are you familiar with a book in the 1800s called Baron Go to Russia? You familiar with that?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well. I apologize.
Wes, what are you
Okay,
asking again?
But was his father, uncle, friends with Nikola Tesla, and shared some Tesla's inventions, and he's familiar with a book called in the 1800s, Baron Goes to Russia.
Baron
I
Goes
don't
to
know
Russia?
that book.
Okay.
No, I don't know that book.
He
I
does.
know
What about-
Nikola Tesla, though.
Yeah. Yeah, Nikola Tesla. Was your dad friends with Nikola Tesla? And
Oh,
shared his
my
invention?
grandfather? Oh, I don't think
Yeah.
so. I did have an uncle though. My uncle John was a brilliant guy at MIT, but I think Tesla died in the early 1900s, so I don't think my uh, great uncle John would have known him. It certainly wasn't my grandfather.
Okay, man. Good question, man. And Angela, I told you was gonna grow up, want to be big, and have your own show. Remember that years
Oh,
ago?
thank you, Wes. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Appreciate your support. James in Houston, good morning.
Good morning. What I would like to ask your guest is what is his opinion on these recent assassination attempts? And you may have already answered it. I just tuned in on his uncle, on Donald Trump. Does he think that this is an overt action by some particular group? What is his opinion on why all of a sudden, after 30 years, that we have an assassination attempt on a former U.S. president?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Thanks. I'm old enough. I was born, boy, a year and 3 days after President Kennedy was assassinated. I remember when Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated, and George Wallace being shot, and Gerald Ford being shot at twice, or at least attempted to, and Ronald Reagan. I'll just say what so many people have said: there's no place for violence in our political system, or anywhere for that matter. I was horrified during the first attempt on Donald's life. I thank God that he was safe, and I reached out to him a number of hours later just to give the good wishes of my family to him. I think what's surprising to Donald right now, and I don't mean to be trite about this, is I don't think he expected anyone to be coming after him. And again, this one that happened the other day, fortunately, and the Secret Service did a great job despite what anybody wants to say. I know that property. The fact that somebody, a Secret Service agent, saw a gun barrel coming out of those bushes is astounding to me. It just needs to stop. And it's just so easy to say that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy to say, let's tone down the rhetoric, and kind of what I just mentioned before. If Donald's going to go to Springfield, Ohio, and to bring his vial with him, I want to be the counter programming to that.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to just have more civil discourse in this country. Simple to say, hard to do. We just need to get it done.
Okay, so I think that what James was alluding to in his question is the surprise that he would have two assassination attempts so close together, because we talked about this yesterday on the show. And what some people are thinking is that this was either an inside job or something that he had staged himself to bring some different attention to what he has going on. So I think that that's what James was alluding to in his question.
I'm sorry. I apologize, James. No, I don't believe in that.
You don't believe that?
I think these were two rogue guys, the young kid out in Pennsylvania, and this guy who, seems to be all over the place in his life right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's anything conspiratorial about it.
Okay, so we're going to go to break right now, and we'll be right back. We got more for you on the other side. News and Talk 1380 WAOK. News and Talk 1380 WAOK. You are listening to the WAOK Morning Show. My name is Angela Green, and again, my very special guest this morning is Fred Trump. So, Fred, for the record, you are a Democrat. Is that correct?
I am a Democrat, always have been, and one of the great inspirations in my political junkiedom, as I like to say, is, man, I believe you're celebrating down there. Is it tonight? Jimmy Carter.
Oh, yeah, Jimmy Carter. Yes, 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 yes. He said he is hanging on just because he wants to vote for Vice President Harris. Did you attend the convention?
I did, yes. I received my credentials from the Harris campaign, and I appreciate that. As
Awesome.
I said on the first live interview I did back, it seems like 100 years ago, but back on July 30th was on The View when I was asked who I was going to be voting for, and it's Kamala Harris. And if
All
the
right.
campaign asks me to, I will campaign on her behalf. Hopefully, it'll take me down to Atlanta, where
Ah,
you have two great senators. I have one of the best parts of doing this book is I got to go back to my old neighborhood, to my old school where I went from first grade to 12th, and I reached out to my old friend from back then, a guy named Farron. I won't give his last name,
uh-huh.
but Farron is an Atlanta uh, resident now.
Uh-huh.
We lost track many years ago, but we got back in touch, and I would love to come down and see him. I know he's listening right now, and perhaps we can, if I get down there, we can get together with you and discuss the old times and how we're going to get Kamala Harris over the finish line here.
That would be great. That would be great. So we're happy to know that you'll be voting blue. But since
Yep.
you are a Democrat, did you happen to vote for your uncle in the any of the times when he was running?
For me, it's policy over politics, Angela.
Uh-huh.
I believe in virtually nothing that Donald and the Republican Party, what they believe in or what the Republican Party has morphed into. I believe in the policies of Kamala Harris. And I will be out there voicing my support for her and these policies. It's the only thing that's going to keep, and it's, again, I use the word twice now. It sounds trite or cliche, but her policies are the only thing that's standing uh, at our backs to keep freedom alive in this country. I
You're
have
right
no
about
doubt
that.
about that.
That's true. Have you ever met her?
I have not.
You have not.
I have
Okay.
not. I hope to. I have a close friend who's very good friends with her. So I am hoping I will have the opportunity to do that. I'm it's so impressed with her.
Okay.
And we can't forget Joe Biden. Joe Biden
Yes.
accomplished so much in such a short amount of time. I know how tough, having been around politicians almost my entire life, how tough it must have been for him to say I'm passing the torch, but he passed the torch to the right person, and it's the right thing for the country. So all the best to Joe Biden.
Yes. Nothing but love for Joe Biden. So Greg from Atlanta has a question for you. Greg?
Well, it's not really a question, but I'm so glad he's on because it's a lot of good truth better than propaganda. However, Fred, how familiar are you with your great grandfather?
It's an interesting question.
And the reason
And
why I ask because
no, please.
I did a little, research, because he came here when he was 16 during the mining thing up in Seattle area, and when people were claiming land, and you're supposed to dig a hole to, and say that, hey, I got a stake, this is my land. But based on history, he never dug a hole, but he built a hotel and actually mined the miners per se, in a sense.
Yep.
And, in fact, I'm looking at the father or the great grandfather of the beginning of lying, as in DNA, because it seems to come natural for Donald. Also, during the 30s, when you look at the slogan that they're using right now, make America great again. In the 30s, that slogan was out doing the American Nancy movement when they had that big rally in Madison Square Garden back in the 30s.
Yep.
Right. And also moving along, I see so many similarities in Donald and Hitler that it's not funny. Because even Hitler, before he could finish his last book, he stated that Germany will rise in the West again. And a lot of these things that I see in laws that are coming down sounds almost exactly the same as that happened in history before. And, I kind of lost my thought there, but I'm so glad you're on, and I wish you a lot of success in whatever you do, and I appreciate y'all taking my call.
No
Well,
problem.
thanks. I really appreciate everything you said, but let me start with let's make it very clear. America is great. Okay? We have our issues, we have our problems. We need to solve them. We need to move forward. Make America great again Project 2025 means one thing to me, going back in time, much like you allude to.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
50s wasn't, in the book, I sort of uh, compare my family back then to a 50s sitcom, but the 50s weren't just Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. There were a lot of very bad things happening back then. And that's sort of the utopian world that Donald, in his mind, wants to try to recreate.
Yes.
We need to keep moving forward.
Yes.
There are some really great comparisons with Donald and my great grandfather in the book. When I grew up, my great grandfather was never mentioned. So we all sort of had our own little versions. Mine was that my great grandfather came here, had his 3 kids, his wife, and left to go out to Seattle and Alaska, and that was it. And that's the reason why he was never talked about. I did know my great grandmother for 3 or 4 years. I do remember her, but I don't think we have the time to go into everything. But the similarities again between my great grandfather and Donald are pretty stunning.
Wow. Wow. Well, let me ask you about your grandmother, Donald's
Yes.
mother. What was she like?
I had a real special relationship with my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's because I reminded her so much of my dad.
Mm-hmm.
She was very sweet, but very tough. I remember having the wooden spoon waved in my direction when I would act up as a kid. Uh,
Oh yeah,
she
we
was,
all know about the spoon.
yeah, I don't ever remember her. I think I was wise enough not to take it too far where I actually got spanked with it. But my grandmother was born and raised in not maybe, as far north in Scotland as you possibly could be. A very dreary part of the world. And she came over to America. Her sister had come first, Aunt Kate. I remember Aunt Kate. And my grandmother actually worked in the house of Andrew Carnegie, one of his houses out on Long Island,
Mm.
who Andrew Carnegie was also from Scotland, and that he had passed away when she worked there, but he was one of the richest guys on the planet. And
Wow.
so, a woman who came from literally nothing works at the house. She was very sweet but tough. And some
Okay.
people have asked me, what would she think of Donald right
Yeah,
now?
that's exactly what I was getting ready to ask you. That
I'll
was my
give you
next question.
I'm going to give you one quick example, Angela, and your caller. I was in Donald's office. This is back in the 80s when Mike Tyson was the king of boxing. And we used to go down to Atlantic City whenever Mike Tyson was fighting. And I'm in Donald's office, and Tyson calls in, and Donald puts it on the speaker and goes, "Mr. Trump, I just hit his wife, Robin Givens, and she came bouncing off the walls."
Mm.
And my grandmother heard that story and she ripped into Donald. She thought that was absolutely horrible. And how could you associate yourself with somebody who would say something like that? So what would she be thinking now? I'd like to think my grandmother would be horrified at Donald's actions.
Wow. Wow. Well, we'll talk some more on the other side. You are going to stay with us for a second hour, correct?
I've got all day for you.
Oh, that is awesome. So listen, 404-726-1380 is the number to call. If you have any questions or comments for Fred Trump, give us a call and we will get you in. We'll be right back. News and Talk 1380 WAOK. News and Talk 1380 WAOK. We are back with our special guest, Fred C. Trump. So, Fred, we got some more callers for you. I want to ask you, though, before we go to the callers, what did you think about Donald's performance in the debate?
uh, I think it was a gift to the Harris campaign and maybe to the country. Unfortunately, poor debate performances don't necessarily translate into election victories, but he was He was off. There's no doubt about it. He won't admit it, though, Angela. He'll never admit it.
No, I don't think he will. He doesn't
In
seem like
his
that kind of
mind, he
guy.
won that debate 90-10, 90-10.
All right. So we have Cliff from Connecticut. Cliff, good morning.
Actually, thank you so much for taking my call. This is so exciting. Matter of fact, Fred, I wish you were picked for the vice president with Kamala Harris. Man, just to know that there's a Trump that's reasonable and decent is so refreshing, and so I appreciate that. And I'm just tuning in. So my question is, I'm just trying to be as delicate as I can, Fred. Now, do you believe or feel that there are people that exist in this society that could be considered racist towards black people or have hatred towards black people? Do you feel that they exist in this country?
Oh, sure they do.
Okay. Do you feel that they are attracted to Donald Trump? I don't know if you discuss this. I'm just tuning in, and so I'm just trying to get a foundation. So you believe that they are looking towards Donald Trump to be what, their leader or spokesperson?
Yeah, and he embraces them. It's nothing new. He will host neo-Nazis to his house down in Florida. This Laura Loomer lunatic spews all these disgusting racial hatred statements and beliefs. Why does he hang out with them? Why does he feel that he needs to have everybody on his side? I'd rather not have a racist on my side, to be quite honest with you. I'd rather they just not exist.
I was going to ask you, why is he dragging that woman around with him, the Laura Loomer woman? What do you think she's doing for him?
There's a fringe out there that eats this stuff up. And I've been saying that he needs to keep up with the base that he charged up years ago. And she's the latest, and she'll be gone soon enough, and he'll find another one.
Wow.
But she is, look, I'm a New Yorker by heart. I live in Connecticut, but I'm a New Yorker. So when he brings her up to the 9/11 ceremony last week, that should tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. So Robert in Decatur, good morning.
Morning. My question is to Mr. Trump is that, do you think that the president is so driven to be president again because of the indictments, or maybe debt to Vladimir Putin?
Well, first of all, please call me Fred. He's driven for many reasons. He hates to lose. I didn't necessarily hear the part about Putin. Hello?
Is he still there? Oh, he's gone. Okay, I'm sorry. We didn't get all of your question, Robert. Tiffany in Douglasville. She dropped. Okay. Tea Party Lou, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I have a question. You talk about Donald Trump. You said he thought your son should just die, or maybe you should let that happen. I mean, you said that. We have to take your word for it. But when I look at the policies of Kamala and Tim Walz, in Minnesota, there is a law where you can allow babies that survive abortions to just die. There have been 8 children under Tim Walz that have died. Kamala has repeatedly been against anything for, born alive protection for children. I guess some of them are probably disabled. That's why they're being aborted. Supplying any care. I first heard this back with Barack Obama when he was a state senator. He was on tape at a hearing talking about, if the mother wants to let him die, and the testimony was you wrap him in a towel and stick him in a sink and let him die. I mean, I'm trying to think, how do you square your support for Tim Walz and Kamala Harris when they support abortion up till birth and they support letting children die if that's what the mother wants.
Tea
Even though
Party
they're
Lou.
no longer.
Tea Party Lou. You really need to stop. Nobody has an abortion at birth, up to birth. You know that. You know better than that.
The law is in 11 states. That's what the law is in 11 states.
Tea
And
Party
if you
Lou,
go to the
you need to
Minnesota
stop. You need to
if
come
you
with
go
a
to
better
the
question than
Minnesota
that.
Department of Health, 8 babies have died.
Okay. All right. I'm cutting there. She calls all the time, Fred. She's a regular on the show, and she asks or says weird things like that all the time.
I would have liked to ask her if Haitians eat geese and ducks and and dogs.
She probably
and cats
would
also.
say yes. She probably would say yes, that she saw them. Yeah. So she probably would say that. So let me ask you something from your book that I saw. So it says, this is on page 88. When the first Selective Service Draft Lottery was held in December 1969, I had just turned 7 and I had a front row seat. I spent that dicey night at my grandparents' house with one of the potential draftees, an especially jittery one, my Uncle Donald. He was 18 months out of Wharton and by then 24 years old, a healthy 6'3" single childless American male living with his parents' house, living in his parents' house and toiling away in the family business. There was a term for a guy like that in 1969, draft bait. Donald was just one kind of person that the sergeants in the United States Army Recruiting Command wanted to fit for fatigues, send off to boot camp, and promptly ship to Vietnam. In fact, he was an even more attractive prospect than most, having spent 8th grade to senior year in a New York military academy. After crossing his father's invisible line, he had already done some basic grounding in military practices. He knew how to march. He knew how to clean a rifle. There was clear photographic evidence of this. Lots of pictures in the Trump family album of the sandy-haired boy in a snappy dress uniform and a shiny brass belt buckle. He had the posture, that's for sure, and chest out, shoulders back, that stare down, the enemy look in his eyes. Donald really didn't want to go to Vietnam, and he didn't. So let's talk about that. Do you know any firsthand information about how he was able to wiggle his way out of that, other than about the bone spurs?
Yeah, well, the bone spurs really were the important thing, because after he graduated from Penn, he was A1. That was the top of the line. That was, as I think I said, pack your bags, you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And, my grandfather hatched a plan that he had a tenant in one of his buildings, the Edgerton. I still remembered. I passed by it a couple of months ago, where he got a podiatrist to say that Donald had bone spurs.
Wow. Simple as that.
Simple as that. I mean, listen, I don't think anybody wanted to go to Vietnam, so I'm not, arguing with the fact that Donald didn't want to go to Vietnam. Fact is, he was right there, again, at the front of the line. So he went from A1 to AY.
Wow.
And that kept him from being drafted into the Army. And he was lucky when the numbers started coming out. And I remember that day clearly, or that night clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a high number. I think it was 356. The interesting thing is his younger brother, my Uncle Robert, had a number in the 200s, but he was going to Boston University. So he was not eligible through his university time.
Wow. Okay. So we'll be back with some more on the other side. News and Talk 1380 WAOK. Talk 1380 WAOK. We are back. I'm Angela Green along with Fred Trump this morning, our very special guest. And Fred, we have Willie from Mableton on the line for you.
Good morning, both of you.
Good morning.
How you doing, Willie?
All right. How about yourself? Yeah. And
fine, thank you.
The question I have for you is, and if you already alluded to this, you don't have to rehash it. But do you think there was collusion between Donald Trump and Russian Putin of Russia and the Russian administration before the Hillary Clinton, 2016 election? Do you think there was collusion between them?
I guess my my quick answer is I don't think Putin needs anybody's help to collude in our elections, but I'm sure I would never implicate Donald personally in that, but you never know if somebody within his group of people may have reached out and tried to do something.
I got you. Yeah, I'm one to still believe that there was collusion, but other people said it wasn't. But I was just wondering how, if there was collusion, how did Michael Cohen not know about it? Because he seemed so close to Trump at that time. He knew where all the bodies were buried at, so to speak. And I just wonder why he never knew anything about that. But we'll just leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that.
Right.
We may never know.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Amari from Atlanta.
Greetings, Sister Green and your guests.
Hello.
I have a question as to, Fred, what do you think happened with the documents, or what was the intent of Donald taking those documents? That's my only question right now.
All right. Thank you, Amari.
I think there's maybe a twofold answer to that. He felt that everything belonged to him. He was the president. He got to do what he wanted to. Rules be damned. He doesn't like rules. And I was in the Oval Office several times where I saw him acting like a business guy from New York, where if he wanted something, he expected to get it. Doesn't work that way in Washington. I had the great pleasure of being an intern for Geraldine Ferraro, who has something in common with Kamala Harris. Geraldine was the first female vice presidential nominee for a major party. Second of all, and there's no proof to this, obviously, but Donald is about making money and keeping power. If he saw some of these items as something he could use to elevate his brand or make money, I wouldn't be surprised if he took it for that reason.
Okay. All right. Tiffany from Douglasville.
Hey, how are you?
Good, Tiffany. How are you doing?
Okay. So I do apologize. My phone had dropped from earlier.
That's okay.
But good morning to you, Miss. What's your name again?
Angela.
Angela.
Uh-huh.
And I just want to say this is, like the last caller said, this is a breath of fresh air to hear some positivity coming out of the family. Like I want to say the teammate. But, and I do agree with the guest. What's your name? Your first name again, sir?
Fred.
Fred. I do agree with what you say, because I am Kamala's voting as well. And like you said, it's time to move forward. We're not going back. And and I just sympathize with all your positivity this morning. And just like the guy said, I wish you was a VP too. But I like Tim Wall too. But you would make a good soon coming president, So keep that in mind if you would.
I will. As I mentioned in the book, I'm a different kind of Trump. And I attribute that again to my parents. There's enough negativity going on. We have to move forward, and I look forward.
That's right.
And I enjoy meeting folks like you, and I hope to do more of it in the next 50 days. Getting out there and sitting down. I'd love to sit down with the guys at Rocky's Barbershop to give my point of view of things, and any business owners or just groups of people. I love doing that. I hope to do more of it just to make sure that Kamala Harris is elected president.
Wow. Thank you. So are there any aspirations in the future for you, Fred, that you might run for president?
Well, there is a photo that you may have seen of me in the chair behind the Resolute desk. I received many phone calls and emails and texts saying, "You're the guy that should be behind there." No. My aspiration is twofold. Number one, do whatever I can do to elect Kamala Harris. At the same time, getting out there and advocating on behalf of people with complex disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
The first night I was out at the convention, I had I'll use the word honor because I don't use it very often, of meeting Representative Debbie Dingell, who deals with disability issues in the House, but Senator Tom Harkin, who was the Senate sponsor for the Americans with Disabilities Act under George H.W. Bush. And he and I pledged to work together to forward the cause of folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He also said, since again, I went to school in Pennsylvania and I have family in Pennsylvania, he wants me to get out there and campaign with Bob Casey, which I would love to do. So if Jamie Harrison is listening from the DNC, I'm available anytime.
Wow. Well, that would be great. So are you concerned for this country if your uncle is reelected?
Yes, I am.
Okay. What is your deepest concern?
Even if he's not elected, Angela, even if he's not elected.
Okay. Why is that? Why are you concerned for each? Why are you concerned if he's not, and why are you concerned if he is?
If he's elected, his policies are antithetical to most everything I believe in and what I believe this country was founded on. If he doesn't win, you can already see what's happening in various local election boards, that they're basically saying, what's the expression, saying the quiet part out loud?
Yeah.
We're not going to certify the election. So we will go through another lengthy judicial process with the Supreme Court that has politicized itself so much over the past few years.
Yes.
I pray that we don't have violence. And you asked, one of your callers asked, or maybe it was you, Angela, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, it was you. If I was ever embarrassed.
Yeah.
The night that I found out that Officer Sitnick passed away, the Capitol Police officer, I spent a couple hours trying to find an email address for his family, and I did. And I just said, look, I am so sorry for your loss. And about an hour later, I had a response from someone from the family saying, don't respond to us again, or don't reach out to us again. And I totally understood that.
Yeah.
But I sat back in my den saying, how embarrassing this is that my name is attached to that part of the Trump family name.
Yeah, I can understand that. All right, so we'll be right back. News and Talk, 1380 WAOK. News and Talk, 1380 WAOK. We are back with Fred Trump. And Fred, I want to ask you, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to ask you this question. So you said you saw the debate, and surely you heard your uncle say that he had nothing at all to do with Project 2025. Do you believe him?
Not for a second. I've been
moment.
joking. That's like him saying he had nothing to do with the building of Trump Tower.
Yeah.
His fingerprints are all over that.
All over it. And what do you find most alarming about Project 2025?
Well, again, I listened to your interview with Joy Reid, who I was on Joy's show. Unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately, she was down, I believe it was in Atlanta for a Harris, one of the first Harris rallies. So I hope to get back on her show. But she nailed three things that I agree with. The decimation of the civil service in Washington. Now, these are hardworking, great people. And I got to see them work up close and personal again when I worked on Capitol Hill. So they're going to get rid of those folks and have some kind of test to make sure you're loyal to Donald, then you can be rehired. That's just dangerous stuff. The way the public school system, as we discussed earlier, will be, again, ripped apart, that will affect so many young kids. Their futures will be impacted for the rest of their lives without a good public school system for all kids, including the disabled. Third, deregulation. Deregulation, it sounds great, and I understand some of it, but you look at with COVID, the response where a lot of the regulations for the environment were taken away, and that impacts minorities especially. The pollution that comes back that we've been fighting for decades, again, started by a Republican president, Richard Nixon. And then, as I heard this morning, the section about denaturalization, meaning that Donald and his administration can go target any group of migrants that have come here legally and basically said, you know what, we don't want you here anymore. You're going back to where you came from, or you're going back to somewhere else. Those are 4 things that I think we all really need to be keeping our eye on, and so much more.
Yes, definitely. Richard in College Park, good morning.
Good morning, Andrew and Fred.
Good morning.
You know,
Hello.
I can imagine how you felt when your heartless uncle said, just let your son die and move to Florida. I mean, that's the worst. I mean, I just don't get it. And that's why being a disabled veteran, I do believe he told General Kelly that he don't want to be in the president of no disabled veteran. That sounds like something he would say, and it's just heartless and unconscionable for him to be considered to be president. Again, I don't get it, and it's very frustrating and disappointing. I applaud you for being such a guy of high character. Sounds like you do need to be in politics.
Well, I tell you what you just said tells me a lot about your character. So I applaud you.
Oh, wow. Fred, you have been a wonderful guest this morning, and I really appreciate you coming and spending all this time with us this morning. I know our interviews are not nearly this long typically, but I am so grateful that you came and that you spent the time that you have with us this morning, and just delighted to have had you as a guest. You've been a wonderful guest this morning.
We're going to do it again, though.
Well, we're happy that you came, and we want to let our listeners know about your book, Fred Trump, All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way. How can people pick up this book?
I believe it's on Amazon and your local bookstores, but Amazon seems to be the place to go.
The main source. Okay. And are you on social media at all?
I do have an Instagram account that is run by my daughter, Andrea, because I know nothing about social media. It was all I could do to press the right button to get on Zoom this morning.
Oh, my goodness. So
and I know you have an Instagram account.
Oh, yes. Mine is Justice and Jazz for sure. 2 things I love, Justice and Jazz. So let me ask you before you go about your other 2 kids, because we didn't mention them at all. So Andrea, how old is Andrea?
Andrea, I don't know if she wants me to mention. She's 30 years old, lives in New York City.
Okay.
She's the love of my life. She's, as I like to say, and she's going to put her eyes up into her head, but she's got a lot of queens in her, which is where I came from in New York. She is sassy and feisty. And then there's Christopher, who is 28 years old, reminds me a lot of my dad, has this really great caring side of him. He's tough as nails, but he just has this side of him that is always wondering what he can do to help somebody else. And that's a wonderful thing to have.
And your wife?
Of course, my wife, Lisa.
Okay.
She's the genius behind how well William has turned out in her life. I like to say she's the great detective and I am the grunt. She when internet was just up and coming, she was finding out all these different therapies, and she'd say, "You got to take." Well, okay, I'll do that. And she continues on, and she's great. She's on the board of a wonderful organization that helps minority children help get funding to take on school systems who don't provide enough services for people with disabilities. So
wow, that's good work.
We're all in this together. This is about helping other people.
Wow, that is some really good work, and it sounds like you have a great family. And so we appreciate you again. If you are ever in Atlanta, call me or send me an email and let me know, and we'll see if we can get together and maybe have you on again at a later time. Maybe as we get closer to the election, maybe we can have you on and come on and be our analyst with us.
I'd love to do that. It's been a pleasure being with you. It really has. I look forward to this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fred Trump, and good luck with your book sales. And we will be right back. News and Talk 1380 WAOK.